I still remember the cold snap that night. The heating in our apartment had gone on the blink, and I was curled up on the couch under 3 blankets. Despite the chill, a bead of sweat rolled down my forehead as I read the invoice in my hand. Nearly $2,000 spent at a trendy lounge I'd never heard of. The strange part? It was billed to my joint credit account, one I barely even used. Bewildered, I flipped the paper over, scanning the date. Last weekend, during the exact hours Marcus claimed he was stuck at the office. My heart drummed in my chest. Where was he really that night? And why had the transaction reference read "family discount"? With questions swirling in my head, I confronted Marcus the following morning. That was when I got my first glimpse of the arrogance that would later unravel our entire relationship. Instead of explaining himself, Marcus merely tossed me a smug glance. "What's the big deal?" he said, sipping coffee as though nothing were amiss. "My relatives needed a good time. They're family, aren't they?" I stood there in shock, grasping the receipt with numb fingers. This was only the beginning of a chain of events that would test my patience and push me to the brink. When I asked why he had issued a family card for his relatives, Marcus threw his head back and laughed. It was as though he had heard something blatantly obvious, as though the reason required no explanation. "Well, of course it's because they're my family," he said with confidence. There was a note of nonchalance in his voice, and maybe even a dash of reproach. "Of course they should have a family card, shouldn't they?" he added, and I felt his calm assurance fill the room. His tone carried a certain brazenness that made me uneasy. Noticing my surprise, Marcus went on, no longer laughing, but preserving that same trace of complacency. "Do you have a problem with that?" he sighed, looking me straight in the eye. "If you understood who took you in when you were completely alone, you wouldn't say such things. You would understand." This sudden twist in the conversation startled me. I had not anticipated such a direct tone from Marcus, who had always seemed gentler and more measured before. "If you're truly grateful for everything, then you should do more for my family," he continued, and his words seemed to linger, gathering a weight that pressed on me. "Then I can count you as part of the family, but for now, it's like you're on probation." Probation period. Such an expression in the context of marriage caught me off guard. Marcus cast a sharp look my way, as if assessing me. "Do you get it? If you don't like it, you can leave at any time. So far, our family consists of only 6 people." Those words seared me, leaving me momentarily numb. Something snapped in my mind. The thought that I was on probation in my own marriage sounded absurd, bordering on the ridiculous. A wave of confusion swept through me, then a surge of anger. As soon as Marcus ceased speaking, I instantly made up my mind. I canceled all our joint credit cards and moved out of our shared home. My name is Jordan West. I am 30 years old, working as a freelancer and illustrator. I was once a designer at a sizable advertising firm. However, after getting married 5 years ago, I decided to leave and work independently. Now I do my tasks from home, which initially appeared to be a practical choice. My parents passed away in an accident when I was still a child. After that, I was raised by my paternal godparents. Once they were gone, I returned to my parents' apartment near the city center to attend college, and I have continued living there ever since. During that period, I met Marcus. We got acquainted at Vietnamese bistros where he worked as a waiter. It was a cozy establishment, serving good food at reasonable prices. My coworkers and I frequented that place often. Marcus, tall and self-assured, wore a pleasant smile and had charming manners. I noticed many patrons specifically came back just to see him. I cannot deny that before long, I became one of his admirers. Marcus outshone the rest. There was something intriguing about him, something that caught your attention and refused to let go. Meanwhile, I kept working on my craft as an illustrator, but on my terms, without rigid deadlines or oppressive leadership. Marcus continued his waiter shifts at that Vietnamese bistros. These shifts were unpredictable, sometimes running late into the night. I grew busier with my projects at home, and it got tougher each day. Yet I had always aspired to be a freelancer, working at my own pace, creating without limitations. An inner voice told me it was the right path. That's a great idea. "Jordan," Marcus said when I expressed my doubts, "it will be easier for you, and you will keep doing what you love." His support became my pillar as we started life as newlyweds, everything feeling perfectly aligned. We were just two against the world. No elaborate ceremonies, no flashy displays. We loved simplicity, so signing at the registry office felt natural. We briefly met each other's families, exchanging formal greetings, and that was all. No grand feasts or fireworks. Marcus resumed work right after registration. I went home, pondering how our life had changed, yet stayed familiar, content with simplicity today. Our days formed an orderly, though somewhat irregular pattern. He returned late from work. I managed freelance orders while tending the household. Despite this, we remained close. We carved out time for dinner together, talking about the day's events. This simplicity felt happy, and I believed our marriage was calm, harmonious, and free from grand expectations. However, a year after the wedding, changes arose. The easy harmony began to unravel at the seams. "My family wants to visit. Is that all right?" Marcus asked. Naturally, I agreed, thinking it a chance to truly know his family, which had been unfamiliar. Having lost my parents as a child, I was drawn to larger families. Marcus's seemed lively and warm. Yet, when they finally arrived, nothing matched my idealized visions. The moment they crossed our threshold, I was stunned. Marcus's older sister, 35, older than us by 3 years, stepped in without greeting, demanding, "Which room is mine?" That abrasive approach startled me. Her manner was vastly different from the polite facade I recalled. Meanwhile, Marcus's younger sister, just 22, entered quietly as if lost in her own world. She barely spoke, echoing the same distant coolness I had sensed previously. Everything felt off. Trying to be hospitable, I showed them to the guest room. I then guided Marcus's parents to a space once belonging to my own mother and father, the sole Japanese-style room in our apartment. I believed they would find comfort there. Yet, inside me, apprehension swelled, warning that things might not go as I hoped. Indeed, Marcus's older sister declared smugly, "Since we'll be living here, you should start serving our family properly." Those words, uttered with such authority, made me catch my breath. I looked to Marcus for help, but he only laughed strangely, a derisive tone I dreaded. That laugh carried a hint of scorn, suggesting my concerns were trivial. I discovered his family had abandoned their own home, moving into my apartment without warning. Marcus found nothing odd. He simply explained they were forced to relocate. I was left astounded, trying to accommodate them. This sudden intrusion shook my faith in Marcus's once gentle nature. Our marriage, previously so serene, now felt overshadowed by tension. I attempted to remain polite, though an undercurrent of betrayal burned in my heart. Where was the supportive husband who encouraged me before? Everything seemed fragile, and I wondered if this was temporary. Day by day, their presence weighed more heavily. The older sister strutted around, issuing commands like she owned the place. The younger sister kept her silent, distant stance. Marcus, instead of intervening, told me to be patient. He believed they just needed time. Meanwhile, I felt displaced in my own home. I adapted our meals to their preferences and rearranged my workspace. The nights that were once peaceful became uneasy. If I voiced my worries, Marcus brushed them aside. I tried to endure. After all, this was the man I loved, the one who'd urged me forward in my passions. Still, uncertainty gnawed at me. I recalled how Marcus once told me that life would be simpler, that I'd do what I adored. Now, I questioned whether that promise held any truth. This single-family visit had morphed into a permanent stay. Each passing moment tightened the sense of imbalance. The older sister's demands and Marcus's dismissive laughter chipped away at my peace. I clung to hope, believing we might restore harmony if we overcame these trials. Yet a voice inside warned that our tranquil life was fading. Unless something changed, our marriage might crumble under this mounting strain entirely. Marcus explained they had to move out because their house could no longer serve as their home, and they had no other options. I wished he had told me earlier. I tried to voice my displeasure without causing a fight, but Marcus, lowering his gaze, gently apologized. "Please, this is temporary until they find a place of their own. I'm begging you." His request sounded so sincere that I couldn't refuse. How could I say no to someone, especially family members in need? Reluctantly, I agreed to a short-term arrangement, fully convinced it would not last long. However, it turned into one of those decisions I would soon regret. From the moment they moved into our apartment, problems began. Marcus's family, showing no trace of restraint, shifted all house chores onto me. Their attitude was outright exploitative. They showed zero regard for the effort I put into keeping everything in order. All four of them lounged around, contributing absolutely nothing helpful. Each did and said whatever they wanted, oblivious to its impact on me or our home. But what shocked me most was their complete disregard for seeking new jobs or living arrangements. When I dared to ask how their job searches were going, Marcus's older sister stared at me, annoyed, and said, "Oh, I quit that lousy supermarket job." I was stunned. I had believed she worked full-time, and her sudden resignation came as a jolt. Apparently, her job was only temporary, and ever since graduating high school, she had never stayed anywhere long-term. Marcus's parents were also out of work. They had quit their last part-time jobs before joining us. Meanwhile, his younger sister claimed to be in school, but it turned out she was barely attending. I felt lost. How could they remain so carefree? When I asked why none of them were trying to find work, Marcus's younger sister responded with obvious mockery in her voice. "Why should I work? I'm part of a rich family now." Her words hit me like a hammer. "Which rich family are you talking about?" I asked, stunned. Her reply floored me. "Yours, of course. You got a bunch of compensation and insurance after your parents' accident. Plus, you don't even have a mortgage on this apartment. You can just live happily without working," she added, laughing as if it were the simplest thing in the world. My hands clenched into fists in rage and helplessness, and I barely held back from lashing out. I decided to talk to Marcus once he got home from work. I needed his support. However, instead of backing me, he flew into a rage, yelling louder than I had ever heard him. "Do you want to throw my family out on the street, Jordan? Everyone is exhausted from being forced out of their home. Can't you put up with them for a while?" he roared. His words left me speechless. I was too taken aback to respond. Then, As abruptly as he had erupted, Marcus softened. In a gentler tone, he apologized. "I'm sorry for shouting. It's been a rough day. Please be patient. They just need some time to recover." Looking back, I realize Marcus had always known how to manipulate any situation, deftly mixing kindness with harshness. At that point, I was blind to it. I believed I was doing the right thing by being patient. So, I agreed. But that patience soon became a true test. Marcus's family began taking even greater advantage of my goodwill. They treated me like a servant, constantly demanding money for outings and entertainment, claiming they needed funds before they could job hunt. I grew increasingly uneasy, feeling a mounting tension inside me. Over time, their financial requests diminished. Maybe Marcus did speak to them, but no one ever returned what they owed me. I tried to reassure myself that the household's peace mattered most. 2 months passed under these odd conditions, with me clinging to the notion that everything would eventually improve. Yet deep inside, I sensed it was only a matter of time before my patience wore thin and the fragile calm shattered. Instead of giving in to those impulses, I decided to take revenge. To do that, I had to remain in this life a while longer, working out my own plan. Marcus had cunningly manipulated me. Now I was determined to seize control, not only of him, but of his entire family. The apartment we lived in was purchased by my father during my childhood. He took out a mortgage soon after I was born. Back then, it was merely a comfortable home in a typical neighborhood. However, the area developed over time. With a new shopping center appearing, the apartment was labeled elite real estate, carrying substantial value. My parents had hoped for more children, and thus chose a larger place with extra space. Even with Marcus's family now residing there, it never felt cramped, though their presence suffocated me. Working from home, I felt particularly stifled, constantly subjected to their intrusions. Still, I persevered for the sake of my plan. Marcus's sister once pointed out that the apartment was mortgage-free, as though that entitled them to more. They had no idea that when I was 4 years old, my parents died in a car accident. This happened on the very day they were returning from my paternal grandfather's funeral. Their car collided with another vehicle on the highway. I could have been in that car if not for a severe fever caused by the flu, so my paternal godparents saved my life, but left me the lonely inheritance of a mortgage-free apartment due to the group loan insurance payouts. I only had to cover utilities and property taxes from then on. Upon discovering how low my monthly expenses were, Marcus immediately offered to pitch in slightly more toward our shared bills. In his words, "There's no mortgage, so I'll contribute my share, and you'll use your income for personal expenses. Sounds fair, right?" At the time, blinded by love, I agreed. I thought it would ease my financial load, but in hindsight, I see my foolishness. I allowed love to blind me to the obvious. Marcus viewed himself as the household provider, yet reality was quite the opposite. I covered most expenses, utilities, groceries, entertainment, and on top of that, 5 real freeloaders had taken over my home. Everything fell on my generosity, which never seemed sufficient, as they became bolder in exploiting my trust. I clenched my teeth and endured, determined that one day, when the moment arrived, I would have the last laugh. 5 months after I made the decision to file for divorce, the chosen day arrived. I felt drained mentally, physically, and emotionally. "It's me or your family," I told Marcus, giving him that ultimatum. None of Marcus's family members had ever lifted a finger to help around the house. They treated my efforts to maintain order as if such work were solely my responsibility, not a collective duty. All their problems and tasks weighed on my shoulders, while I juggled professional work from home and life among these people. I wasn't merely sitting at a computer for fun. I was genuinely employed, earning a living, handling serious matters. Yet they likely viewed me as some freeloading figure who needed to know her place. In their minds, Marcus was the true breadwinner. Eventually, I couldn't bear it. In tears, I laid everything out to Marcus. He met my words with a smirk, an icy, dismissive smile that shattered my last hopes for mutual understanding. "Then you should leave," he said calmly, as though this matter had been decided long ago. "Didn't I tell you before? You're not truly part of this family. You've never earned your place among us." Those words echoed in every corner of my mind, leaving behind a painful, ringing silence. The shock and hurt from his admission sank in, and I stood there, frozen, unable to believe what I was hearing. He went on, "If you can't live with my family, then you'll have to go. And yes, since I had nothing to do with it, I'll take this apartment and half your savings as part of the property division." Suddenly, the entire plan revealed itself as one unified picture, a scheme he'd likely hatched from the beginning. Manipulate me, use me, and eventually take my possessions when I could no longer endure his family's presence. Words I had once taken for gestures of love now felt like lies. I realized he'd set a trap specifically designed to push me out of my own life. I was aware that he and his family had been trying to wear me down, but hearing him admit it so plainly was devastating. Before me stood the man I had loved, the one with whom I shared my life. Yet now, I was seeing a wholly different Marcus, distant and cold. Strangely, this confrontation allowed me to finalize my decision. "Okay," I said, summoning every bit of courage. "I've decided to divorce you, Marcus, but this apartment is mine, and you know it." Clearly, he hadn't expected such a forceful retort. Generally, I yielded, agreed to whatever he wanted, but everything had changed. "I'm divorcing you because you let your family move in without asking me, and then they disregarded my role as lady of the house," I declared, meeting his eyes. Marcus's surprise was palpable, maybe even a hint of shock. He clearly wasn't ready for this. Rising from my seat, I strode to the door and added, "I'm not wasting another second on you, but understand you'll need to leave this home as well." Normally in control, Marcus lost his composure then. He shouted, "This is a joke, right? This is our house. We're not leaving. Don't you realize we have residency rights? You can't just throw out people who live here." By then, I'd already stopped listening. I left the apartment without looking back, heading straight to my paternal godparents' home. I needed to recover, rethink my life, and seek help from those who truly cared about me. When I shared everything with them, their response was swift and unyielding. Grandma threw up her hands, scolding me for not coming sooner. Grandpa was equally upset, asking how I had endured such treatment. Tears in my eyes, I apologized for not seeking them out before. But now I felt stronger than ever. "I may look frail," I told them, "but I am not." The following day, after I left, Marcus got in touch almost immediately. "Hey, what's going on?" he demanded, sounding both annoyed and perplexed. I was surprised by how fast he'd taken action. Apparently, he had mustered all this drama in just one night, but I was sure he hadn't expected me to file for divorce so quickly. "I've transferred everything to my lawyer," I said calmly. "What do you mean the cards aren't working?" Marcus's voice on the other end was initially puzzled, then tinged with panic. He didn't immediately grasp that I'd severed his access to my resources. "What did you do?" he asked, in a tone almost bordering on outrage. "What did I do?" I repeated, a curious, liberating satisfaction rising in me, knowing I now held all the cards, literally and figuratively. "I canceled the family card you were using. Remember, it was originally linked to my account? Before I left, I moved every subscription and contract to a new card and deactivated that one. Naturally, yours stopped working." Working, after all, was something only I had been paying for all this time. I paused deliberately, savoring the moment his confusion shifted into helplessness. Marcus tried to speak again, but I went on. "Yes, you contributed a small amount the first 4 months for utilities and property taxes. It's not much, and if you prefer, I can deduct it from the alimony." I smirked as I said that. Indistinct protests came over the phone, as though he wished to object, but realized he had no footing. The facts were on my side. Indeed, Marcus had paid for those initial 4 months, but his promises soon grew empty. He concocted excuses for delaying payment, citing large expenses or sudden bills, then eventually quit paying altogether. Perhaps he forgot his responsibilities, imagining they remained valid forever, but that was his own oversight, not mine. I had long since freed myself from those empty pledges, along with every memory of our marriage. "I kept meticulous records of our household expenses," I said coolly. "Now, I'll present them as proof when dividing our savings fairly. Didn't you insist on a fair split? Fine, then we'll do it precisely by the book." "Yes, I agree," he responded, his voice tinged with annoyance. Evidently, he hoped I would be more lenient. However, just days later, he called me yet again. "What do you mean family property is zero?" he barked. Frustration came crackling through the phone. "You're receiving money from your parents' insurance, plus alimony. Why are you hiding it?" Those words revealed his real intentions. He believed my inheritance and insurance benefits should belong to both of us. He and his family apparently assumed that I was obligated to share. I calmly explained, "Funds I acquired before marriage aren't part of our communal property. We accumulated nothing together during our marriage, so there's nothing to split." Marcus couldn't restrain his displeasure. "Don't lie to me." "If you suspect I'm lying, hire a lawyer," I suggested. His attempts to make me waver were growing more desperate. Still, I maintained my composure. "If you don't believe me, have your lawyer check. From now on, talk to me only through my attorney. I'm done speaking to you directly." I ended the call, my resolve unshaken. Everything was now in the lawyer's hands. I had no intention of letting him pull me into worthless disputes again. A month had elapsed since I vacated the apartment. Marcus and his family ended up leaving too, not because they suddenly recognized I was correct, but because they couldn't uphold their comfortable routine. Marcus's salary alone wasn't enough to support 5 people accustomed to living large off my credit card. Once I blocked their access, financial strain made saving money impossible. They had always believed they could keep taking from me without consequence, but those consequences arrived swiftly alongside the deactivated cards. I foresaw this outcome from the start. I had willingly let them use the card, fully aware that their reckless spending would one day backfire. Finally, that day came. Marcus's relatives turned on him, harassing him for more cash. When he refused, they pilfered money from his wallet. Despite his anger, they never admitted wrongdoing. On the contrary, they faulted him for driving me away and endangering everyone's well-being. As if matters couldn't get worse, the electricity, gas, and water were shut off in the apartment. Of course, I had orchestrated that. Since I had no plans to return soon, I refused to finance their comfort. Now, they had to grapple with a reality I had learned to handle long ago. Marcus made a hurried effort to restore utilities, hoping he could fix the issues over the phone, just as he always had. Now, I'm a successful illustrator. I finally have the freedom to focus on my work. Maybe I'll end up living alone again, and that doesn't frighten me. In fact, I feel like this is the perfect time to start a new chapter in my life. I just need a bit more time to recuperate. I'll continue staying with my paternal godparents until I feel strong enough to move on. Yet there's one thing I'm certain of. Nobody will deceive me anymore. I won't let any man, even a charming one, take control of my life. Next time I consider a relationship, it will be with someone who truly sees me as an equal partner. And if that never happens, I'm perfectly content to walk this path on my own.